Hello and welcome back to the Immigrant Programmers channel. My name is Kritika and this video is the first in our series on ORMs. So in this video we're going to learn about Sequelize, and to tell you a little bit more about ORMs, they're called Object Relation Mapping, and what that means is these are libraries that are used to do all the heavy lifting in the background for you so that you don't focus on database queries and you focus more on your Node.js code. And ORMs convert database queries into easy-to-use JavaScript objects. And in this video, we're going to talk about Sequelize. And Sequelize is an ORM for SQL-based databases. So without further ado, let's get coding.
Without wasting another second, let's start learning Sequelize right away. So I've already prepared the project structure for you so that we don't waste time and we concentrate on the main stuff here. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to install the Sequelize package and another package that is used by Sequelize, which is called MySQL2. So I'm just going to go npm install, or you could also just go npmi and -- save, because this is going to be a production dependency. It's a core dependency of your project. And then you type the name of the package. So Sequelize, and you need another package, which is MySQL2 or MySQL2. So go ahead and hit enter if you're doing it with me right now. I'm not going to do that because I already have these packages installed. So let's move on to the next step. So in order to use a database, you first need to establish a connection with that database. So that's exactly what we're going to do here in the database.js file. So I'm going to require the Sequelize class from the package Sequelize, and I kept the S capital here deliberately because this is a class or a constructor function. So I'd like to follow the industry practice. Okay, the next step that we do is we create a new instance of this class. So this Sequelize here is a new instance that I created. And now whenever you use the Sequelize constructor, you have to pass, it takes like certain options that you need to pass. So the first one here is the name of the database that you need to connect to. The second one is the username, which is root. And the third parameter that it takes is the password. So I expect you to put your username here and your password to connect to the database. And now the fourth parameter that I used here is optional. But you can pass on a JavaScript object here, and in that object you can define certain things. So for example, this dialect field here explicitly tells Sequelize that we're going to talk with the MySQL database. As different SQL databases or engines can use a little bit of a different structure. Now the second field that I use here is the host field. So I explicitly told Sequelize that I'm going to use my local host, but you don't necessarily have to do that because the default value of this host field is localhost. Okay, so next I just want to export my Sequelize instance because I want to use this instance in other files to call different Sequelize methods. And now that we have established a connection with our database, the next thing that we're going to do is create models. So there will be two different entities in our database. The first one would be customer and the second one would be orders. So each customer can have multiple orders. So to say it in SQL terms, we have two different tables, a customer table and an order table. So now the customer table will have certain fields and we need to define these fields in the models. Now, how do we do that? It's right here. So we use the define method on the Sequelize instance that we just created in the last step. Now this define method takes two parameters. The first is the name of the table, which is customer, and the second is an object describing each of the fields of this table. So my customer table has an ID, a name, and an email field. So let's describe how each of these fields is going to look. So the ID field in the customer table, that will be the customer ID. It's going to have a type of Sequelize.integer. So we can use the data types provided by Sequelize just by calling the data type on the Sequelize class. Now we can provide some other information as well. So for example, I want my ID field to be an auto-incrementing field. I won't allow null values, and I want to make it as the primary key of my customer table. Now this right here should give you a better understanding of the actual ORM functionality. We're literally mapping SQL tables into JavaScript objects here. Okay, now let's move on to the name field. We would like to describe this name field, and it's going to have a type of string, and we're not going to allow null values here as well. And same with the email field. So I now have my complete customer model and I would like to export it now. Okay, now we're going to define the model for the second table, which is order. And we're going to do it the same way we did for customers. So we're going to use the .define method on the Sequelize instance. And it's going to take the name of the table as the first parameter, so which is order in our case. And as the next parameter, it's going to take a JavaScript object. Now the order table has two different fields, an order ID and a total purchase price. So I define the order ID pretty much the same way as I define the customer ID. So the type is integer, I want to auto increment it, and I won't allow null values, and I want to make it the primary key of the order table. The next field is the total field. So this will have a type of integer as well, or you know what, you can make it as a float too if you want. So it's up to you. And I don't want to take null values here as well. Okay, now I have my order model ready as well. So I'm going to export this. Okay, so now that we have an established database connection and we have also defined our models, it's now time to sync our JavaScript models to actual SQL tables. And how do we do that? We use the sync method provided by Sequelize. Pretty straightforward, huh? Okay, so I'm going to call the sync method on my Sequelize instance. And then I'm going to see the result that it returns. I'm just going to console log it. And I can also catch any errors that occur here. And I will also console log the errors. Perfect, so this looks good now. And if you're wondering how calling the sync method on the Sequelize object will actually create the tables for you, it's because when we define our models, we use the same Sequelize object here. So the Sequelize object knows about all your models, about all your relations, if any, and it will translate these models here, the customer model and the order models, into actual tables. Okay, so without further ado, let's run this code and see what happens. And there you go. I'm going to expand this so you can see the entire object that I received here. So it executed some queries, and as you can see, there were the create table queries, and the customer table and the order table was created. Perfect, so let's go take a look at my SQL workbench and see if the tables were actually created. Okay, so I am here and I'm going to refresh all the databases that I have. And if I go inside tables, I see my customer table and my order table. Perfect, so it works. Okay, now it's time to populate these tables. So we're going to do some insert queries and we're going to do some select queries using Sequelize. Okay, before doing the queries, I think I forgot something here. So we know that there exists a relation between our customer table and an order table. So we need to define this relation here using Sequelize so that the Sequelize knows about this relation and takes appropriate actions in the table. Okay, so what's the relation between our customer and order table? Think about it. A customer can have many orders. So there will be a has many relation between our customer and the order. So how do we define it? We go customer.hasMany, with a single Y, and then order. So that's how we define the one-to-many relation between our customer table and our order table. Now, in order to define a relation between two SQL tables, you need a foreign key. So here, what Sequelize will do is, now that it knows that the customer and the order table is related with a one-to-many relation, it will automatically create a foreign key called customer ID inside your order table. And how do I know that? Because it's present in the Sequelize documentation, and you're going to know that too in a second. So if I go to Google search and I just type Sequelize documentation and click on the first link, I'm using version 6, so I'm going to go to the documentation for version 6. And inside here, we have information about how to define the models, how to query, and also we have information about associations right here. Okay, so inside association, there can be 4 different types of association. Has one, belongs to, has many, belongs to many. And we have used the has many type of association. So if I go down here, it says whenever we use the whenever we use the a.hasmany b association, which we have in our case, which is customer.hasManyOrder. The association means that a one-to-many relationship exists between A and B, so between customer and order in our case, with the foreign key being defined in the target model B. So that is the reason the foreign key was defined inside the order table. And let's go and execute our code and see if that is the case. Okay, so we don't need to check the response because we already saw it in the last step and it's going to be the same. Let's go to MySQL workbench, refresh it and see if we have the foreign key. So if I go and expand my table, so my customer table has the fields that I define, ID, name, email, and these are the default field added by MySQL, created at and updated at. And what about the orders table? Let's see the fields here. It's ID, total, created at, updated at. Well, it doesn't seem to have the customer ID foreign key here. Okay, let's see what's wrong. So there's a little trick here. Because I already used the sync method and all my tables have already been synced and I did not define the relation at that time. So instead of using the sync method now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to for sync it so that my tables are going to be created again. So when I use the for sync, what I do is I just go and pass an object inside the sync method and I pass the field force and I set it to true. Now what this will do is if there exist already created tables, it's going to drop those tables first and then it's going to recreate those tables with the new information. So that's how I for sync my Sequelize models. So now I'm going to run it again and let's see if I have my foreign key now. So the customer table is still the same, perfect. And the foreign key was supposed to be added to the orders table and it is present. So if you see this customer ID foreign key, Sequelize added this automatically because we just defined the relation that we have between the two tables. Isn't that great? And you see here in the result as well that when I use the for sync, I first see a drop table query before any create table queries. So that's how you know that your tables are literally created all over again when you use the for sync. Okay, so who's excited to populate the customer table by creating their first customer? I know I am. And how do we do that? Is we call the create method provided by Sequelize on our customer table or the customer model. And inside this create method, I pass on an object which take the fields that we defined in the customer model. So we define the name. Let's go back here and see that we define the name and we define the email. We don't need to pass on the ID field because this is an auto increment field and it will be generated by default. So let's go ahead and pass the name of our first customer. So I'm gonna pass on Chandler Bing, a big Friends fan. I've watched it like, I don't know how many times. I don't even remember now. Okay, so I'm going to pass on the email as well. So cb@gmail.com. Oh wait, it shows me an error. What am I missing here? Oh, I actually missed out the field names. So I'm going to pass the name here and email because that is what I defined here. Remember, the name of my field is name and email, and that's exactly what I'm going to pass here. Now I can do a dot then here and see what the result is, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do a promise chaining. I'm going to use a better approach. I'm going to return this promise from here and do a dot then out here. So now I will receive a customer and I can console log it. Perfect. So we have successfully implemented our first insertion statement using Sequelize. Let's see how it works out. So I'm going to go ahead and run the program. Ooh, okay. Let's take a look at the result first, and then we'll go to Workbench and see if it was actually inserted. Okay, so by the looks of it, I think the insertion query it was triggered. At least I can see it here in the log. And then I see my return, my console log, first customer created, and this is my customer object. The name, the email, the ID, and updated and created that field. Okay, let's go to Workbench and refresh all the tables and all the databases and see if I have the first customer inside my table. So customer, and there you go. It was successfully inserted. Awesome, let's go ahead and insert an order now. So right here, I have my customer in the .then block, and now I'm gonna insert an order that this customer placed. So I will go order.create, and let's go check out what we need to pass to create an order. So we go to the order model and we check that there's just one field, which is called total. Okay, so we're gonna go and just pass the total field inside our object, and I'm gonna put 45 here. And now I'm gonna do another promise chaining. So I'm gonna go ahead and create another .then block, and I will now receive the order. And I'm gonna just console log the order. Let's run this. Okay, so we take a look at the result, and I have the customer, and I also have the order. And now that I used the for sync, so you know now my customer table and the order table must have been deleted first. So the entry that I just put in the last step was deleted as well, and they were recreated. So my entry here, Chandler Bing, my first customer, was added again. And as a proof, I can show you that the ID is still 1. Perfect, and now we have the first order placed by Chandler Bing as well. And let's go and take a look in the database. Okay, so what do we got here? We got our first customer, Chandler Bing, and the ID is still 1, it's not 2. So this is the first customer. And we have the first order here. But do you notice something odd here? Do you see the customer ID field is null? So how do I know that this is the customer, Chandler Bing is the customer who placed this order? I have the customer ID field, but I have not populated it. So that means I've just inserted an order, but I have not related this order to my customer. So what did I do wrong, huh? Okay, so let's understand. Now you see that I've inserted a new order by calling the create method on the order object. But what I wanted to do instead was to add the order placed by this customer here, Chandler Bing. And how do I do that? So for starters, we know that we have this customer object here. So I must use this customer object, right, to create its order. And now this is where you'll realize the beauty of Sequelize. Ooh, it rhymes. Okay, so the point is that I already have a create order method provided by Sequelize on my customer object, since I have the order table and I have the customer table. And Sequelize knows that there exists a relation between them. So it gives me a create order method that I can invoke on the customer object, and I can pass on the total price here. And now I don't need this. I'm going to return this instead. And everything else stays the same. And now let's see what happens. So let's go and have a look at the customer table and the orders table. So customer correctly added, and order is correctly added as well, because I see the customer ID is filled with the ID of the customer who placed this order. That was 1. So that's how you use Sequelize to not focus on the SQL statements, to focus more on your code, on your core Node.js code. Now, what should we do next? Let's select all the orders placed by this customer. So in order to do that, we use the findAll method on our order table because we want to return the select statement from our order table. So since we want to find all the orders associated with this customer right here, it takes a where clause as well. And in the where clause, we're going to pass the customer ID. So it takes an object, and I'm going to pass the where clause, and I want the customer ID for that. But do you realize that I don't have access to my customer object here? So what do? I'm going to create a variable customer ID, and I'm going to store my customer ID in this variable and access it here in my where clause. And to do that, I simply need to assign the customer ID to this customer ID variable right here when I have my customer. Perfect, so I've completed my select from where SQL statement using Sequelize. And now I'm going to return this, and we could do another then block here, and I'm going to receive all the orders here, and then I can console log these orders as well. And I'm going to go ahead and run the code. Awesome, so do you see the select from where SQL statement executing here? And now I have my console log, all the orders, and I have the orders. So there's just one order because we just inserted this one order for $45 for our customer Chandler Bing, who has the customer ID 1. So that has been returned correctly. Awesome, so we have completed our Sequelize tutorial with this. We have connected to the database, we have created the models, we've actually synced those models and translated them into actual SQL tables, and we have defined the relation between these models, and also we have executed some insertion statements and some select from where statements. If you have any more questions, I would highly encourage you to go check out their official documentation right here. And I'm going to put a link to it down in the description below. And I'm also going to put a link to my GitHub repository. And you can go and check out the code. If you need help, you can refer to it and stuff. So I'll see you back at the studio for the outro.
So thank you so much for watching this video. If you like the video, hit the like button and press subscribe if you haven't already subscribed to the channel. Share this video with your friends and family, especially whoever is interested in learning about JavaScript, and we will keep creating more content for you. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.